Thank you. The world is currently undergoing a radical transformation. Technologies are evolving faster than ever, changing the way we work and communicate year on year. More and more people are getting access to more comfortable living standards. It's been estimated that by 2030, 3 billion new middle-class consumers would enter the global economy. That means 3 billion more people with access to electricity, means of transportation, means of communication, healthcare. This is great news, and it's happening at unprecedented speed. To give an example, in China and India at the moment, incomes are increasing 10 times faster than they did in UK during the Industrial Revolution, and that's for 200 times the scale. Now, of course, like for any change, this comes with some risks. And these recent developments have already been putting some pressure on resources. And that's something we can see by looking at the evolution of the prices of commodities. So commodities are things like food, energy, metals, etc., all kinds of raw materials. Over the 20th century, we've mostly seen a steady decline of average prices that were driven by improvements in resource productivity, by the discovery of new reserves. But since 2000, prices have gone back up to reach back the levels where they were in 1900. This increasing prices for some industries is putting direct pressure on their profit margins. And this comes together with an increase in price volatility, which is how much prices are fluctuating, which means that for these same companies, it's becoming increasingly hard to predict what their future costs are going to be. And if businesses are in trouble, so are economies. So a number of people have been looking into this problem and looking for solutions, whether it's to find new reserves of materials or to find new sources of improvement of resource productivity, or whether just to consume less. But I think that none of these is as compelling as the idea of a circular economy. The concept of circular economy is both really beautiful and elegant as a theory, and then it is realistic and pragmatic in its application. If you look at it from an abstract perspective, you can see the circular economy as something as aesthetically pleasing as some mathematical theories. To see this, think of the current economy as being linear. We take resources, we make products, and then we throw them away. Rather than trying to make this line a little bit longer or a little bit thinner to win some time, the idea of a circular economy is to turn it into a circle. In mathematics, you would call that a change of topology, and it implies that you end up with a completely different set of properties. Rather than trying to make it work within the current system, a circular economy is suggesting to completely change the system itself. Now, as much as I'm sure we all love a beautiful theory, this is only going to remain an intellectual idea unless you can really apply it in a realistic way. And the thing with circular economy is that it has the potential to deliver benefits at all scales, from individual citizens to whole economies. And that means there are benefits for businesses too. And that might be one of the reasons why the concept is gaining so much traction over the past years. Now, to see how this works, we need to go a bit deeper into the model of circular economy. The first principle of this model is that you would need to separate biological materials from technical materials. Biological materials, which we represent on the left side of this diagram, are pretty much everything that can flow back into the biosphere safely and restore natural capital. That will involve, for example, that you would avoid any form of toxic chemicals. And then on the other side, you have technical materials, which are here on the right side, which are pretty much everything else. It's things like plastics, metals, etc. And I suggest that we understand this model a bit better by first focusing on these technical materials. And let's take the example of a mobile phone. In a circular economy, a mobile phone would first go through several cycles of upgrade and maintenance, staying within the same user. After that's done, you can still remarket the mobile phone to another user. Once you've done that, you could still remanufacture this mobile phone by, so for example, that's replacing the screen or replacing the battery, reusing some of the parts. And only once you've gone through all these steps would you then finally recycle your mobile phone. And you would try to do that at the highest possible quality, which might, for example, involve first separating all the different materials in there. This sounds great. However, you might say this also sounds like an awful lot of costs. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has worked with McKinsey to estimate what's the value that we could capture from each of these approaches. And this is the picture we first found. We found that through reuse, reuse was the most valuable approach. You could capture $6 per phone, and that's after deducting the cost of doing this. We found that recycling had a very low value. You could just capture about 10 cents per phone. But that's better than nothing, and especially it's better than remanufacturing, which in our analysis turned out to be something that costs more to do than the value you can get from it. This is very representative of what's happening today. A company like Mazuma Mobile, for example, that will buy back your mobile phone. When they get a phone, either it still works and then they sell it again to another market, or it doesn't work anymore and then they recycle it. They won't bother trying to repair it because it just doesn't make economic sense. Now, of course, that's not the whole story. This is just the business as usual story. Because in a circular economy, you wouldn't start tackling problems at the end of pipe. You would avoid them altogether at the design stage. If you think of a mobile phone, for example, you can design it so that it's easy to disassemble. You can design its components so that they can last longer. You could design a modular phone, which can be upgraded easily every time there's a new innovation, a new technology. What's more, you can also improve the treatment approaches, the way these things are treated, which makes that you can have outputs that are more valuable and treatment methods that are less costly. So now we've done a second analysis, taking into account these small tweaks in design and in treatment methods. And what we found is a very different picture. We found that reuse was still the most valuable approach, but this time with nearly $7 per phone. Recycling had become more valuable as well. You could get more than $1 per phone through recycling. But most importantly, remanufacturing became a profitable approach for companies. You could get about $2.5 per phone through remanufacturing. The trend that we're seeing here is one where, so reuse more valuable than remanufacture, more valuable than recycling, is one where the approach is that preserve more of the integrity of the product. So that's preserving more of the materials in there, more of the complexity of the product, more of the embedded energy. Those approaches are also more profitable, more valuable. This is actually just really logical. We call this the power of the inner circle. And that's because these approaches that preserve more of the integrity of the products are also approaches that usually require to go less far back into the supply chain. And as a consequence, graphically, they look like smaller circles. Now, this is great, redesigning phones, etc. However, if products end up in a drawer at home or worse, just in the bin, this is all for nothing. One of the key success factors to be able to capture this value is that products need to go back into the supply chain. As a company, that means that you need to change the way you interact with your customers, with your consumers, your users. One way you could do this is, for example, putting in place a take-back scheme. I give you X pounds and you give me your phone back. Either you do something like that where you incentivize the users, or you have to do something extremely convenient and practical for them to take part in it. That's one way to do it, but you could also do something more innovative and just change your business model altogether. You could learn from the success of a company like Zipcar. So Zipcar rents out cars for small or long amounts of time. And what we see in this kind of model is that consumers are increasingly interested in just getting access to a product rather than owning it. If you could take the case of mobile phones, in many countries already now, people don't really buy their phone up front. So it's only a small change to go from that to an approach where the ownership of the product really remains within the producer. And once a producer keeps the ownership of the product, it also changes the incentives for them. That means that now it's become extremely interesting to design a product for reuse, because if a product can be reused, that means that basically you can sell it several times. If you design, for example, a phone to be easy to disassemble, it costs much less to refurbish it or to remanufacture it. So far, I've really spoken essentially about the technical side, phones, cars, etc. But there are many more opportunities on the biological side, where on the technical side, the idea is to try to circulate materials and products as long as possible in the economy. On the biological side, we'll rather go for strategies of returning nutrients back into the biosphere after having taken advantage as much as possible of the value of that product. The kind of things you might do is, for example, designing packaging that is easy to compost or that can just dissolve in hot water. You might improve the collection of food waste and make sure you also improve the treatment of food waste, for example, through anaerobic digestion. There are many more opportunities. Now, all of these opportunities can largely be driven by businesses themselves. That's one of the strengths of this model, is that it doesn't require top-down control to happen. However, there are a number of enabling factors, of systems conditions that can make this transition easier. The first and foremost is education. In many industrialized countries, education is optimized for a linear system. It's more like training than education. It's rigid, mechanistic, and focused on throughput. A number of thought leaders, some of them are in this room, are looking for new ways to teach and new ways to learn, and the new kind of topics you would need to teach and learn so that the next generation can think critically, think in systems, and think of the circular economy as something obvious. The second one is around policy and regulations. Policy can help by setting the rules of the games and taking away some of the barriers. And finally, collaboration is really key to a circular economy. Whether it's collaboration between policymakers and businesses, between businesses and research, between big corporates and small innovators, collaboration across the supply chain, collaboration across sectors, collaboration across geographies. This collaboration is key, and it requires the right legal frameworks and the right platforms to take place. Now, how much is this worth? We've done another piece of analysis working with McKinsey, where we tried to estimate what was the size of the prize. And we first focus on the sector of medium lift complex goods. Those are things like mobile phones, cars, as well as machinery, home appliances, furniture, etc. And we found that in that sector, in EU alone, we could achieve up to $630 billion cost savings in materials a year. That's like 3-4% of the GDP of EU, to give a comparison. Then we looked at a second sector, which is a sector of fast-moving consumer goods. That includes things like food, packaging, hygiene products, clothing. There we found an additional $700 billion a year at the global level this time. So that means if you put this together in terms of material cost savings, you could achieve over $1 trillion savings a year globally. But this is only part of the story. This is only the material savings. There are also a number of energy savings that could be achieved through these models. But also companies can not only achieve cost savings, but as well as find new sources of revenues through circular economy practices. That's because they're going to change the way they work with their customers through new business models and just through better products. They can also improve how resilient they are to shocks and become less dependent on the constantly fluctuating prices of raw materials. For consumers as well, this is good news, because a circular economy could make really high quality products much more affordable. Finally, a circular economy could help creating a resilient and thriving economy, as well as a healthier natural environment and restored natural capital. And this is the right time to act. Businesses and governments alike are getting increasingly aware of resource constraints. Investors are becoming increasingly concerned about the long-term viability of their actions. New forms of consumptions keep popping up. And there are a number of new technologies that came up in the past few years that would also greatly help this transition. This is the time to prepare businesses for the change and to start demonstrating the benefits. This is the time to adapt our policy frameworks. This is the time to educate the professionals of tomorrow, to redesign products and services, and to just do business differently. This is the time to reinvent our future. Thank you.